Chapter 28. Poirot asks a few questions. We had a curious walk home. Poirot was clearly following out some train of thought in his own mind. Occasionally he murmured a word under his breath. I heard one or two of them. Once he said, "Candles," and another time he said something that sounded like "douze." I suppose if I had been really bright, I should have seen the line his thoughts were taking. It was really such a clear trail. However, at the time, it sounded to me mere gibberish. No sooner were we at home than he flew to the telephone. He rang up the Savoy and asked to speak to Lady Edgware. "Not a hope, old boy," I said with some amusement. Poirot, as I have often told him, is one of the worst informed men in the world. "Don't you know," I went on, "she's in a new play. She'll be at the theatre. It's only 10:30. Poirot paid no attention to me. He was speaking to the hotel clerk, who was evidently telling him exactly what I had just told him. "Ah, is that so? I should like then to speak to Lady Edgware's maid." In a few minutes the connection was made. "Is that Lady Edgware's maid? This is Monsieur Poirot speaking. Monsieur Hercule Poirot. You remember me, do you not?" "Très bien. Now, you understand, something of importance has arisen. I would like you to come and see me at once." "But yes, very important. I will give you the address. Listen carefully." He repeated it twice, then hung up the receiver with a thoughtful face. "What is the idea?" I asked curiously. "Have you really got a piece of information?" "No, Hastings. It is she who will give me the information." "What information?" "Information about a certain person." "Jane Wilkinson?" "Oh, as to her, I have all the information I need. I know her backside before, as you say." "Who then?" Poirot gave me one of his supremely irritating smiles and told me to wait and see. He then busied himself in tidying up the room in a fussy manner. 10 minutes later the maid arrived. She seemed a little nervous and uncertain. A small, neat figure dressed in black. She peered about her doubtfully. Poirot bustled forward. "Ah, you have come. That is most kind. Sit here, will you not, Mademoiselle Ellis, I think?" "Yes, sir. Ellis." She sat down in the chair Poirot had drawn forward for her. She sat with her hands folded on her lap, looking from one to the other of us. Her small, bloodless face was quite composed, and her thin lips were pinched together. "To begin with, Miss Ellis, you have been with Lady Edgware how long?" "3 years, sir." "That is as I thought. You know her affairs well?" Alice did not reply. She looked disapproving. "What I mean is, you should have a good idea of who her enemies are likely to be." Alice compressed her lips more tightly. "Most women have tried to do her a spiteful turn, sir." "Yes. They've all been against her. Nasty jealousy. Her own sex did not like her?" "No, sir. She's too good looking, and she always gets what she wants. There's a lot of nasty jealousy in the theatrical profession." "What about men?" Alice allowed a sour smile to appear on her withered countenance. "She can do what she likes with a gentleman, sir, and that's a fact." "I agree with you," said Poirot, smiling. "Yet even allowing that, I can imagine circumstances arising." He broke off. Then he said in a different voice, "You know Mr. Brian Martin, the film star?" "Oh, yes, sir." "Very well?" "Very well indeed." "I believe I am not mistaken in saying that a little less than a year ago, Mr. Brian Martin was very deeply in love with your mistress." "Head over ears, sir." "And it's is, not was, if you ask me." "He believed at that time she would marry him, eh?" "Yes, sir." "Did she ever seriously consider marrying him?" "She thought of it, sir. If she could have got her freedom from his lordship, I believe she would have married him." "And then I suppose the Dirk of Merton." Let's start that one over. "And then I suppose The Duke of Merton appeared on the scene. Yes, sir. He was doing a tour through the States. Love at first sight, it was with him. And so goodbye to Brian Martin's chances. Alice nodded. Of course, Mr. Martin made an enormous amount of money, she explained, but the Duke of Merton had position as well, and her ladyship was very keen on position. Married to the Duke, she'd have been one of the finest ladies in the land. The maid's voice held a smug complacency. It amused me. So Mr. Bryan was, how do you say, turned down? Did he take it badly? He carried on something awful, sir. Ah, he threatened her with a revolver once, and the scenes he made, it frightened me, it did. He was drinking a lot, too. It went all to pieces. But in the end he calmed down. So it seemed, sir, but he still hung about, and I didn't like the look in his eye. I've warned her ladyship about it, but she only laughed. She's one who enjoys feeling her power, you know what I mean? Yes, said Poirot thoughtfully. I think I know what you mean. We've not seen so much of him just lately, sir. A good thing, in my opinion. He's beginning to get over it, I hope. Perhaps. Something in Poirot's utterance of the word seemed to strike her. She asked anxiously, You don't think she's in danger, sir? Yes, said Poirot gravely. I think she is in great danger, but she has brought it on herself. Her hand, running aimlessly along the mantel-shelf, caught a vase of roses, and it toppled over. The water fell in Ella's face and head. I had seldom known Poirot clumsy, and I could deduce from it that he was in a great state of mental perturbation. He was very upset, rushed for a towel, tenderly assisted the maid to dry her face and neck, and was profuse in apologies. Finally, a treasury note exchanged hands, and he escorted her towards the door, thanking her for her goodness in coming. But it is still early, he said, glancing at the clock. You will be back before your mistress returns. Oh, that is quite all right, sir. She's going out to supper, I think. And anyway, she never expects me to sit up for her unless she says so special. Suddenly, Poirot flew off at a tangent. Mademoiselle, pardon me, but you are limping. That's nothing, sir. My feet are a little painful. The corns? Murmured Poirot in the confidential voice of one sufferer to another. Corns apparently it was. Poirot expatiated upon a certain remedy which, according to him, worked wonders. Finally, Ellis departed. I was full of curiosity. Well, Poirot, I said. Well? He smiled at my eagerness. Nothing more this evening, my friend. Tomorrow morning, early, we will ring up Yop. He will ask him to come around. We will also ring up Mr. Brian Martin. I think he will be able to tell us something interesting. Also, I wish to pay him a debt that I owe him. Really? I looked at Poirot sideways. He was smiling to himself in a curious way. At any rate, I said, you can't suspect him of killing Lord Edgware, especially after what we've heard tonight. That would be playing Jane's game with a vengeance. To kill off the husband so as to let the lady marry someone else is a little too disinterested for any man. What profound judgment! Now don't be sarcastic, I said with some annoyance. And what on earth are you fiddling with all the time? Poirot held the object in question up. With the pince-nez of the Goudelas, my friend. She left them behind. Nonsense. She had them on her nose when she went out. He shook his head gently. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. What she had on, my dear Hastings, were the pair of pince-nez we found in Carlotta Adams' handbag. I gasped. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29. Poirot Speaks. It fell to me to ring up Inspector Yop the following morning. His voice sounded rather depressed. Oh, it's you, Captain Hastings. Well, what's in the wind now? I gave him Poirot's message. Come round at 11? Well, I dare say I could. He's not going to get anything to help us over young Ross's death, has he? I don't mind confessing that we could do with something. There's not a clue of any kind. Most mysterious business. I think he has got something for you, I said noncommittally. He seems very pleased with himself at all events. That's more than I am, I can tell you. All right, Captain Hastings, I'll be there. My next task was to ring up Brian Martin. To him I said what I had been told to say, that Poirot had discovered something rather interesting which he thought Mr. Martin would like to hear. When asked what it was, I said that I had no idea. Poirot had not confided in me. There was a pause. All right, said Brian at last. I'll come. He rang off. Presently, somewhat to my surprise, Poirot rang up Jenny Driver and asked her also to be present. He was quiet and rather grave. I asked him no questions. Brian Martin was the first to arrive. He looked in good health and spirits, but, or it might have been my fancy, a shade uneasy. Jenny Driver arrived almost immediately. She seemed surprised to see Brian, and he seemed to share her surprise. Poirot brought forward 2 chairs and urged them to sit down. He glanced at his watch. Inspector Yop will be here in 1 moment, I expect. Inspector Yop? Brian seemed startled. Yes, I have asked him to come here informally, as a friend. I see. He relapsed into silence. Jenny gave a quick glance at him, then glanced away. She seemed rather preoccupied about something this morning. A moment later, Yop entered the room. He was, I think, a trifle surprised to find Brian Martin and Jenny Driver there, but he made no sign. He greeted Poirot with his usual jocularity. Well, Monsieur Poirot, what's it all about? You've got some wonderful theory or other, I suppose? Poirot beamed at him. No, nothing wonderful. Just a little story. Quite simple. So simple that I am ashamed not to have seen it at once. I want, if you permit, to take you with me through the case from the beginning. He upsighed and looked at his watch. If you won't be more than an hour, he said. Reassure yourself, said Poirot. It will not take as long as that. See here, you want to know, do you now, who it was killed Lord Edgware, who it was killed Miss Adams, who it was killed Donald Ross? I'd like to know the last, said Yop cautiously. Listen to me, and you shall know everything. See, I am going to be humble. Not likely, I thought unbelievingly. I am going to show you every step of the way. I am going to reveal how I was hoodwinked, how I displayed the gross imbecility, how it needed the conversation of my friend Hastings and a chance remark by a stranger to put me on the right track. He paused, and then, clearing his throat, he began to speak in what I called his lecture voice. I will begin at the supper party at the Savoy. Lady Edgware accosted me and asked for a private interview. She wanted to get rid of her husband. At the close of our interview, she said somewhat unwisely, I thought, that she might have to go around in a taxi and kill him herself. Those words were heard by Mr. Brian Martin, who came in at that moment. He wheeled round. That is so, is it not? We all heard, said the actor. The Widburns, Marsh, Carlotta, all of us. Oh, I agree. I agree perfectly. Eh bien, I did not have a chance to forget those words of Lady Edgware's. Mr. Brian Martin called on me the following morning for the express purpose of driving those words home. Not at all, cried Brian Martin angrily. I came. Poirot held up a hand. You came, ostensibly, to tell me a cock and bull story about being shadowed, a tale that a child might have seen through. You probably took it from an out-of-date film. A girl whose consent you had to obtain, a man whom you recognized by a gold tooth. Mon ami, no young man would have a gold tooth. It is not done in these days, and especially in America. The gold tooth, it is a hopelessly old-fashioned piece of dentistry. Oh, it was all of a piece. Absurd. Having told your cock and bull story, you get down to the real purpose of your visit, to poison my mind against Lady Edgware. To put it clearly, you prepare the ground for the moment when she murders her husband. I don't know what you're talking about, muttered Brian Martin. His face was deathly pale. You ridicule the idea that he will agree to a divorce. You think I am going to see him the following day. but actually the appointment is changed. I go to see him that morning, and he does agree to a divorce. Any motive for a crime on Lady Edgware's part is gone. Moreover, he tells me that he has already written to Lady Edgware to that effect. But Lady Edgware declares that she never got that letter. Either she lies, her husband lies, or somebody has suppressed it. Ooh. Now I ask myself, why does Monsieur Brian Martin give himself the trouble to come and tell me all these lies? What inner power drives him on? And I form the idea, Monsieur, that you have been frantically in love with that lady. Lord Edgware says that his wife told him she wanted to marry an actor. Well, supposing that is so, but that the lady changes her mind by the time Lord Edgware's letter agreeing to the divorce arrives, it is someone else she wants to marry, not you. There would be a reason then for you suppressing that letter. I never. Presently you shall say all you want to say. Now you will attend to me. What then would be your frame of mind? You, a spoilt idol who has never known a rebuff. As I see it, a kind of baffled fury, a desire to do Lady Edgware as much harm as possible. And what greater harm could you do her than to have her accused, perhaps hanged for murder? Good Lord, said Yop. Poirot turned to him. But yes, that was the little idea that began to shape itself in my mind. Several things came to support it. Carlotta Adams had two principal men friends, Captain Marsh and Brian Martin. It was possible then that Brian Martin, a rich man, was the one who suggested the hoax and offered her $10,000 to carry it through. It has seemed to me unlikely all along that Miss Adams could ever have believed Ronald Marsh would have the $10,000 to give her, and she knew him to be extremely hard up. Brian Martin was a far more likely solution. I didn't. I tell you I didn't, came hoarsely from the film actor's lips. With the substance of Miss Adams' letter to her sister was wired from Washington. Ooh la la, I was very upset. It seemed that my reasoning was wholly wrong. But after I made the discovery, the actual letter itself was sent to me, and instead of being continuous, a sheet of the letter was missing. So he might refer to someone who was not Captain Marsh. There was one more piece of evidence. Captain Marsh, when he was arrested, distinctly stated that he thought he saw Brian Martin enter the house. Coming from an accused man, that carried no weight. Also, Monsieur Martin had an alibi. That, naturally, it was to be expected. If Monsieur Martin did the murder, to have an alibi was absolutely necessary. That alibi was vouched for by the one person only, Miss Driver. What about it? Said the girl sharply. Nothing, mademoiselle, said Poirot, smiling, except that the same day I noticed you lunching with Monsieur Martin, and that you presently took the trouble to come over and try to make me believe that your friend Miss Adams was specially interested in Ronald Marsh, not, as I was sure was the case, in Brian Martin. Not a bit of it, said the film star stoutly. You may have been unaware of it, Monsieur, said Poirot quietly, but I think it was true. It explains, as nothing else could, her feeling of dislike toward Lady Edgware. That dislike was on your behalf. You had told her all about your rebuff, had you not? Well, yes. I felt I must talk to someone, and she was sympathetic. Yes, she was sympathetic. I noticed it myself. And what happens next? Ronald Marsh, he is arrested. Immediately your spirits improve. Any anxiety you have had is over. Although your plan has miscarried owing to Lady Edward's change of mind about going to a party at the last minute, yet somebody else has become the scapegoat and relieved you of all anxiety on your own account. And then, at a luncheon party, you hear Donald Ross, that pleasant but rather stupid young man, say something to Hastings that seems to show that you are not so safe after all. It isn't true, the actor howled. The perspiration was running down his face. His eyes looked wild with terror. I tell you, I heard nothing. Nothing. I did nothing. Then, I think, came the greatest shock of the morning. "That is quite true," said Poirot quietly, "and I hope you have now been sufficiently punished for coming to me, Hercule Poirot, with a cock and bull story." We all gasped. Poirot continued dreamily. "You see, I am showing you all my mistakes. There were 5 questions I had asked myself. Hastings knows them. The answer to 3 of them fitted in very well. Who had suppressed that letter? Clearly, Brian Martin answered that question very well. Another question was what had induced Lord Edgware suddenly to change his mind and agree to divorce. Well, I had an idea as to that. Either he wanted to marry again, but I could find no evidence pointing to that, or else some kind of blackmail was involved. Lord Edgware was a man of peculiar tastes. It was possible that facts about him had come to light which, while not entitling his wife to an English divorce, might yet be used by her as a lever coupled with a threat of publicity. I think that is what happened. Lord Edgware did not want an open scandal attached to his name. He gave in, though his fury at having to do so was expressed in the murderous look on his face when he thought himself unobserved. It also explains the suspicious quickness with which he said, "Not because of anything in the letter," before I had even suggested that that might be the case. 2 questions remained. The question of an odd pair of pince-nez in Miss Adams' bag, which did not belong to her, and the question of why Lady Edgware was rung up on the telephone while she was at dinner at Chiswick. In no way could I fit in Mr. Brian Martin with either of those questions. So I was forced to the conclusion that either I was wrong about Monsieur Martin or wrong about the questions. In despair, I once again read that letter of Miss Adams through very carefully, and I found something. Yes, I found something. See for yourselves. Here it is. You see the sheet is torn unevenly, as often happens. Supposing now that before the H at the top there was an S. Ah, you have it. You see, not he, but she. It was a woman who suggested this hoax to Carlotta Adams. Well, I made a list of all the women who had been even remotely connected with the case. Beside Jane Wilkinson, there were 4. Geraldine Marsh, Miss Carroll, Miss Driver, and the Duchess of Merton. Of those 4, the one that interested me most was Miss Carroll. She wore glasses. She was in the house that night. She had already been inaccurate in her evidence owing to her desire to incriminate Lady Edgware, and she was also a woman of great efficiency and nerve who could have carried out such a crime. The motive was more obscure. But after all, she had worked with Lady Edgware. But after all, she had worked with Lord Edgware some years, and some motive might exist of which we were totally unaware. I also felt that I could not quite dismiss Geraldine Marsh from the case. She hated her father. She had told me so. She was a neurotic, highly strung type. Suppose when she went into the house that night, she had deliberately stabbed her father and then coolly proceeded upstairs to fetch the pearls. Imagine her agony when she found that her cousin, whom she loved devotedly, had not remained outside in the taxi, but had entered the house. Her agitated manner could be well explained on these lines. It could equally well be explained by her own innocence, but by her fear that her cousin really had done the crime. There was another small point. The old box found in Miss Adams' bag had the initial D in it. I had heard Geraldine addressed by her cousins as Dina. Also, she was in a pensionnat in Paris last November, and might possibly have met Carlotte Adams in Paris. You may think it fantastic to add the Duchess of Merton to the list, but she had called upon me, and I recognized in her a fanatical type. The love of her whole life was centered on her son, and she might have worked herself up to contrive a plot to destroy the woman who was about to ruin her son's life. Then there was Miss Jenny Driver. He paused, looking at Jenny. She looked back at him, an impudent head on one side. "And what have you got on me?" she asked. "Nothing, mademoiselle, except that you are a friend of Brian Martin's, and that your surname begins with D." That's not very much. There's one thing more. You have the brains and the nerve to commit such a crime. I doubt if anyone else had. The girl lit a cigarette. Continue, she said cheerfully. Was Monsieur Martin's alibi genuine or was it not? That was what I had to decide. If it was, who was it Ronald Marsh had seen go into the house? And suddenly I remembered something. The good-looking butler at Regent Gate bore a very marked resemblance to Monsieur Martin. It was he whom Captain Marsh had seen, and I formed a theory as to that. It is my idea that he discovered his master killed. Beside his master was an envelope containing French banknotes to the value of £100. He took these notes, slipped out of the house, left them in safe keeping with some rascally friend, and returned, letting himself in with Lord Edgware's key. He let the crime be discovered by the housemaid on the following morning. He felt in no danger himself, as he was quite convinced that Lady Edgware had done the murder, and the notes were out of the house and already changed before their loss was noticed. However, when Lady Edgware had an alibi and Scotland Yard began investigating the antecedents, he got the wind up and decamped. Yup nodded approvingly. I still have the question of the pince-nez to settle. If Miss Carroll was the owner, then the case seems settled. If she could have suppressed the letter, and in arranging details with Charlotte Adams, or in meeting her on the evening of the murder, the pince-nez might have inadvertently found their way into Charlotte Adams' bag. But the pince-nez were apparently nothing to do with Miss Carroll. I was walking home with Hastings here, somewhat depressed, trying to arrange things in my mind with order and method, and then the miracle happened. First, Hastings spoke of things in a certain order. He mentioned Donald Ross having been one of 13 at table at Sir Montague's corner, and having been the first to get up. I was following out a train of thought of my own and did not pay much attention. It just flashed through my mind that, strictly speaking, that was not true. He may have got up first at the end of dinner, but actually Lady Edgware had been the first to get up, since she was called to the telephone. Thinking of her, a certain riddle occurred to me, a riddle that I fancied accorded well with her somewhat childish mentality. I told it to Hastings. He was, like Queen Victoria, not amused. I next fell to wondering who I could ask for details about Monsieur Martin's feeling for Jane Wilkinson. She herself would not tell me, I knew, and then a passer-by, as we were all crossing the road, uttered a simple sentence. He said to his girl companion that somebody or other should have asked Ellis, and immediately the whole thing came to me in a flash. He looked round. Yes, the pince-nez, the telephone call, the short woman who called for the gold box in Paris. Alice, of course, Jane Wilkinson's maid. I followed every step of it, the candles, the dim light, Mrs. Van Dusen, everything. I knew. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30. The story. He looked round at us. Come, my friends, he said gently. Let me tell you the real story of what happened that night. Carlotta Adams leaves her flat at 7 o'clock. From there she takes a taxi and goes to the Piccadilly Palace. What? I exclaimed. To the Piccadilly Palace. Earlier in the day she has taken a room there as Mrs. Van Dusen. She wears a pair of strong glasses, which, as we all know, alters the appearance very much. As I say, she books a room, saying that she is going by the night boat train to Liverpool, and that her luggage has gone by. At 8:30, Lady Edgware arrives and asks for her. She is shown up to her room. There they change clothes. Dressed in a fair wig, a white taffeta dress, and ermine wrap, Carlotta Adams, and not Jane Wilkinson, leaves the hotel and drives to Chiswick. Yes, it is perfectly possible. I have been to the house in the evening. The dinner table is lit only with candles. The lamps are dim. No one there knows Jane Wilkinson very well. There is the golden hair, the well-known husky voice and manner. Oh, it was quite easy. And if it had not been successful, if someone had spotted the fake, Well, that was all arranged for too. Lady Edgware wearing a dark wig, Carlotta's clothes and the pince-nez, pays her bill, has her suitcase put on a taxi, and drives to Euston. She removes the dark wig in the lavatory. She puts her suitcase in the cloakroom. Before going to Regent Gate, she rings up Chiswick and asks to speak to Lady Edgware. This has been arranged between them. If all has gone well, and Carlotta has not been spotted, she is to answer simply, "That's right." I need hardly say Miss Adams was ignorant of the real reason for the telephone call. She goes to Regent Gate, asks for Lord Edgware, proclaims her individuality, and goes into the library, and commits the first murder. Of course, she did not know that Miss Carroll was watching her from above. As far as she is aware, it will be the butler's word, and he has never seen her, remember, and also she wears a hat which shields her from his gaze, against the word of 12 well-known and distinguished people. She leaves the house, returns to Euston, changes from fair to dark again, and picks up her suitcase. She has now to put in time till Carlotta Adams returns from Chiswick. They have agreed as to the approximate time. She goes to the corner house, occasionally glancing at her watch, for the time passes slowly. Then she prepares for the second murder. She puts the small gold box she has ordered from Paris in Carlotta Adams' bag, which, of course, she is carrying. Perhaps it is then she finds the letter. Perhaps it was earlier. Anyway, as soon as she sees the address, she scents danger. She opens it. Her suspicions are justified. Perhaps her first impulse is to destroy the letter altogether, but she soon sees a better way. By removing one page of the letter, it reads like an accusation of Ronald Marsh, a man who had a powerful motive for the crime. Even if Ronald has an alibi, it will still read as an accusation of a man so long as she tears off the S of she. So that is what she does, then replaces it in the envelope and the envelope back in the back. Then, the time having come, she walks in the direction of the Savoy Hotel. As soon as she sees the car pass, with presumably herself inside, she quickens her pace, enters at the same time, and goes straight up the stairs. She is inconspicuously dressed in black. It is unlikely that anyone will notice her. Upstairs she goes to her room. Carlotta Adams has just reached it. The maid has been told to go to bed. A perfectly usual proceeding. They again change clothes, and then, I fancy, Lady Edgware suggests a little drink to celebrate. In that drink is the veronal. She congratulates her victim, says she will send her the check tomorrow. Carlotta Adams goes home. She is very sleepy, tries to ring up a friend, possibly Monsieur Martin or Captain Marsh, for both have Victoria numbers, but gives it up. She is too tired. The veronal is beginning to work. She goes to bed, and she never wakes again. The second crime has been carried through successfully. Now, for the third crime. It is at a luncheon party. Sir Montague Corner makes a reference to the conversation he had with Lady Edgware on the night of the murder. That is easy. She has only to murmur some flattering phrase, but Nemesis comes upon her later. There is a mention of the judgment of Paris, and she takes Paris to be the only Paris she knows, the Paris of fashions and frills. But opposite her is sitting a young man who was at that dinner at Chiswick, a young man who heard the Lady Edgware that night discussing Homer and Greek civilization generally. Carlotta Adams was a cultured, well-read girl. He cannot understand. He stares, and suddenly it comes to him. This is not the same woman. He is terribly upset. He is not sure of himself. He must have advice. He thinks of me. He speaks to Hastings. But the lady overheard him. She is quick enough and shrewd enough to realize that in some way or other she has given herself away. She hears Hastings say that I will not be until 5. At 20 to 5 she goes to Ross's maisonette. He opens the door. He is very surprised to see her, but it does not occur to him to be afraid. A strong, able-bodied young man is not afraid of a woman. He goes with her into the dining room. She pours out some story to him. Perhaps she goes on her knees and flings her arms around his neck. And then Swift and sure she strikes, as before. Perhaps he gives a choked cry. No more. He too is silenced. There was a silence. Then Yop spoke hoarsely. You mean she did it all the time? Poirot bowed his head. But why, if he was willing to give her a divorce? Because the Duke of Merton is a pillar of the Anglo-Catholics. Because he would not dream of marrying a woman whose husband was alive. He is a young man of fanatical principles. As a widow, she was pretty certain to be able to marry him. Doubtless she had tentatively suggested divorce, but he had not risen to the bait. Then why send you to Lord Edgware? Ah, parbleu. Poirot, from having been very correct in English, suddenly relapsed into his native self. To pull cotton wool over my eyes, to make me a witness to the fact that there was no motive for the murder. Yes, she dared to make me Hercule Poirot, her cat's paw. Ma foi, she succeeded too. Oh, that strange brain, childlike and cunning. She can act. How well she acted, surprise at being told of the letter her husband had written her, which she swore she had never received. Did she feel the slightest pang of remorse for any of her 3 crimes? I can swear she did not. I told you what she was like, cried Brian Martin. I told you. I knew she was going to kill him. I felt it. And I was afraid that somehow she'd get away with it. She's clever, devilish clever in a kind of half-wit way, and I wanted her to suffer. I wanted her to suffer. I wanted her to hang for it. His face was scarlet. His voice came thickly. Now, said Jenny Driver. She spoke exactly as I've heard nursemaids speak to a small child in the park. And the gold box with the initial D in Paris, November inside, said Yup. She ordered that by letter, and sent Ellis her maid to fetch it. She had no idea what was inside. Also, Lady Edgware borrowed a pair of Ellis pince-nez to help in the Van Dusen impersonation. She forgot about them and left them in Carlotta Adams' handbag. Her one mistake. Oh, it all came to me as I stood in the middle of the road. It was not polite what the bus driver said to me, but it was worth it. Ellis pince-nez. Ellis calling for the box in Paris. Ellis, and therefore Jane Wilkinson. Very possibly she borrowed something else from Ellis besides de pince-nez. What? A corn knife. I shivered. There was a momentary silence. Then Yop said with a strange reliance in the answer, Monsieur Poirot, is this true? It is true, mon ami. Then Brian Martin spoke, and his words were, I thought, very typical of him. But look here, he said peevishly, what about me? Why bring me here today? Why nearly frighten me to death? Poirot looked at him coldly. To punish you, monsieur, for being impertinent. How dare you try to make the games with Hercule Poirot? And then Jenny Driver laughed. She laughed and laughed. Serves you right, Brian, she said at last. She turned to Poirot. I'm glad I can be that it wasn't Ronnie Marsh, she said. I've always liked him. And I'm glad that Carlotta's death won't go unpunished. As for Brian here, well, I'll tell you something, Monsieur Poirot. I'm going to marry him. And if he thinks he can get divorced and married every 2 or 3 years in the approved Hollywood fashion, well, he never made a bigger mistake in his life. He's going to marry me and stick to me. Poirot looked at her determined chin, and at her flaming hair. It is very possible, mademoiselle, he said, that may be so. I said that you had sufficient nerve or anything, even to marry a film star. End of Chapter 30. Chapter 31. A Human Document. A day or 2 after that, I was suddenly recalled to the Argentine. So it happened that I never saw Jane Wilkinson again, and only read in the paper of her trial and condemnation. Unexpectedly, at least unexpectedly to me, she went completely to pieces when charged with the truth. So long as she was able to be proud of her cleverness and act her part, she made no mistakes, but once her self-confidence failed her, owing to someone having found her out, she was as incapable as a child would be of keeping up a deception. Cross-examined, she went completely to pieces. So, as I said before, that luncheon party was the last time I saw Jane Wilkinson. But when I think of her, I always see her the same way, standing in her room at the Savoy, trying on expensive black clothes with a serious, absorbed face. I am convinced that that was no pose. She was being completely natural. Her plan had succeeded, and therefore she had no further qualms and doubts. Neither do I think that she ever suffered one pang of remorse for her 3 crimes that she had committed. I reproduce here a document which she had directed was to be sent to Poirot after her death. It is, I think, typical of that very lovely and completely conscienceless lady. Dear Monsieur Poirot, I have been thinking things over, and I feel that I should like to write this for you. I know that you sometimes publish reports of your cases. I don't really think that you've ever published a document by the person themselves. I feel, too, that I would like everyone to know just exactly how I did it all. I still think it was all very well planned. If it hadn't been for you, everything would have been quite all right. I felt rather bitter about that, but I suppose you couldn't help it. I'm sure if I send you this, you'll give it plenty of prominence. You will, won't you? I should like to be remembered, and I do think I am really a unique person. Everybody here seems to think so. It began in America when I got to know Merton. I saw at once that if only I were a widow he would marry me. Unfortunately, he's got a queer sort of prejudice against divorce. I tried to overcome it, but it was no good, and I had to be careful because he was a very kinky sort of person. I soon realized that my husband simply had got to die, but I didn't know how to set about it. You can manage things like that ever so much better in the States. I thought and I thought, but I couldn't see how to arrange it. And then suddenly I saw Carlotta Adams do her imitation of me, and at once I began to see a way. With her help, I could get an alibi. That same evening I saw you, and it suddenly struck me that it would be a good idea to send you to my husband to ask him for a divorce. At the same time, I would go about killing my husband, because I've always noticed that if you speak the truth in a rather silly way, nobody believes you. I've often done it over contracts, and it's always a good thing to seem stupider than you are. At my second meeting with Carlotta Adams, I broached the idea. I said it was a bet, and she fell for it at once. She was to pretend to be me at some party, and if she got away with it, she was to have $10,000. She was very enthusiastic, and several of the ideas were hers, about changing clothes and all that. You see, we couldn't do it here because of Ellis, and we couldn't do it at her place because of her maid. She, of course, didn't see why we couldn't. It was a little awkward. I just said no. She thought me a little stupid about it, but she gave in, and we thought of the hotel plan. I took a pair of Ellis pince-nez. Of course, I realized quite soon that she would have to go out of the way, too. It was a pity. But after all those imitations of hers, really, they were very impertinent. If mine hadn't happened to suit me, I'd have been very angry about it. I had some Vernal myself, though I hardly ever take it, so that was quite easy. And then I had quite a brain-wave. You see, it would be so much better if it could seem that she was in the habit of taking it. I ordered a box, a duplicate of one I'd been given, and I had her initials put on it, and an inscription inside. I thought if I put some odd initial in Paris, November, inside it, it would make it all much more difficult. I wrote for the box from the Ritz when I was in there lunching one day, and I sent Ellis over to fetch it. She didn't know what it was, of course. Everything went off quite well on the night. I took one of Ella's corn knives while she was over in Paris because it was nice and sharp. She never noticed because I put it back afterwards. It was a doctor in San Francisco who showed me just where to stick it in. He'd been talking about lumbar and cistern punctures, and he said one had to be very careful, otherwise one went through the cistercia magna and into the medulla oblongata, where all the vital nerve centers are, and that would cause immediate death. I made him show me the exact place several times. I thought it might perhaps come in useful one day. I told him I wanted to use the idea in a film. It was very dishonorable of Carlotta Adams to write to her sister. She'd promised to tell nobody. I do think it was clever of me to see what a good thing it would be to tear off that one page and leave he instead of she. I thought of that all by myself. I think I'm more proud of that than anything else. Everyone always says I haven't got brains, but I think it needed real brains to think of that. I thought things out very carefully and did exactly what I'd planned when the Scotland Yard man came. I rather enjoyed that part of it. I had thought perhaps that he'd really arrest me. I felt quite safe because I'd have to believe all those people at the dinner, and I didn't see how they could find out about me and Carlotta changing clothes. After that, I felt so happy and contented. My luck had held, and I really felt everything was going to go right. The old Duchess was beastly to me, but Martin was sweet. He wanted to marry me as soon as possible, and hadn't the least suspicion. I don't think I've ever been as happy as I was those few weeks. My husband's nephew being arrested made me feel just as safe as anything, and I was more proud of myself than ever for having thought of tearing that page out of Carlotta Adams' letter. The Donald Ross business was just sheer bad luck. I'm not quite sure how that happened when it spotted me. Something about Paris being a person and not a place. Even now, I don't know who Paris was, and I think it's a silly name for a man anyway. It's curious how, when luck starts going against you, it keeps on going. I had to do something about Donald Ross quickly, and that did go all right. It might have, because I hadn't time to be clever or think of making an alibi. I did think I was safe after that. Of course, Ellis told me you had sent for her and questioned her, but I gathered it was all something to do with Brian Martin. I couldn't think what you were driving at. You didn't ask her whether she had called for the parcel in Paris. I suppose you thought if she repeated that to me, I should smell a rat. As it was, it came as a complete surprise. I couldn't believe it. It was just uncanny the way you seemed to know everything I'd done. I just felt it was no good. You can't fight against luck. It was bad luck, wasn't it? I wonder if you're ever sorry for what you did. After all, I only wanted to be happy in my own way, and if it hadn't been for me, you would never have had anything to do with the case. I never thought you'd be so horribly clever. You didn't look clever. It's funny, but I haven't lost my looks a bit, in spite of all that dreadful trial and the horrid things that man on the other side said to me, and the way he battered me with questions. I look much paler and thinner, but it suits me somehow. They all say I'm wonderfully brave. They don't hang you in public any more, do they? I think that's a pity. I'm sure there's never been a murderess like me before. I suppose I must say goodbye now. It's very queer. I don't seem to realize things a bit. I'm going to see the chaplain tomorrow. Yours forgivingly, because I must forgive my enemies, mustn't I? Jane Wilkinson. P.S. Do you think they'll put me in Madame Tussaud's? End of chapter 31, and end of Agatha Christie's 13 at Dinner.